So if you have a lot of fabric, which we have here, it can be challenging to figure out how much you need to fold up at one point in time. So when cutting out the body, what I like to do is I like to take one of the edges and put that down on the floor. And then if I'm going to have a train, this is where I kind of calculate that in. This is going to be kind of more of a loose pulled hem, but kind of more of a working length. And so then I put my foot out here and I have my fabric go a couple of inches past my foot. I take it straight up the body, and then I put my fingers up here where it's on my shoulder, and that, when I fold it down, is going to be the amount of fabric that I need to cut off my body pieces. All right, and so now we're ready to get cutting. You'll need to have your pattern all ready to go. Scissors, of course. A tape measure is handy because there are a few more measurements that we can take, although you can do it without it, like what we just did, to figure out how much we're going to be folding over for the body. Pens, sometimes you need these. I tend not to use a whole lot of pens. I find they just kind of get in my way. But my true love for marking things out is soap. So this is an old sliver of soap. You just pull it out, the bar out before you use it up completely in the shower. And this is brilliant for marking on most fabrics, especially those fabrics that you're going to wash, because then it just washes right out and it doesn't matter how much you mark it up. So, for my pattern, this is a 4-paneled Code Hardy. There are a lot of tutorials out there on how to make and draft your own patterns if you don't have them. I go ahead and with mine I have the seam allowance included. I also have the date included, which is really helpful. And then I also mark where my gussets are going to be, both on my back and my sides. And then for my bodice piece, I have a couple of necklines measured out. And this one we're actually going to be doing a much higher neckline than either one of these options. So let's get rolling. And here's the starting point with the front bodice over here in the lower corner and then the back up in the front. This fabric is 45 inches wide, and I've cut out enough of these that I kind of can guess where my placement is initially going to go for these things. One measurement I do like to just double check is my Gore, side Gore measurement, and so I go ahead and I find my hip bone, put the measuring tape there, and then I kind of just walk it back, and I look down and I kind of estimate. If I can't see it, I can put the tape on my knee right here just to pin that tape in place. And I look down, and it's going to be about 42 or so, and then I add 2 more inches just because maybe add 2 more inches because for some reason my gores always end up getting eaten up short. So I add on a couple inches, and that's going to be 44. And what that measurement is going to be is from my hip mark here on my pattern down in the line, keeping that angle straight to 44. I take my soap and I mark that line of 44, and I don't know, maybe add a couple, another inch or so. We'll be cutting this off, it'll be fine. And then that's one of our first marks there, to 44. All right, and then same thing over here. This is the side gusset mark, and I want to come up here to 44. And I'm not too worried about this angle. You want to try to keep it as in line with this angle that's shooting off here. But really what I'm doing is I'm maximizing my fabric usage by angling this out all the way to here, where that seam, where that cut is going to be. And then I angle this up into that Gore mark, and I continue tracing out my pattern. Yum, love this soap. All right, and then because of the curves of the world, again here, take it down to 44, maybe 46 just in case. And then we're going to make a curve mark here, and this is going to be the front portion. You can either cut it on the curve here or just cut it straight and cut this off here. this is the fold of the fabric up here. So, and then when we are cutting out the back, sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a train. And so with that, I don't care how much this is. Hopefully it's more than 44. Yay, it is. It's 48. And so I'm going to run that all the way down to the edge here. And then a nice line running up. And it follows the pattern. Okay, and so I'm going to continue to trace it out. And we'll check back in. Alright, so everything's marked out. I include both, this is where my hip bones are, and then where the gussets sometimes are, and I often kind of just aim for the middle of it too. And hopefully that shows up well on the camera, but it's all marked out with the chalk, or with the soap. And then since I'm making this neckline much higher than normal, I just took 2 fingers and I added 2 fingers worth of extra fabric around here. And that hopefully will be high enough. Yeah, I think that'll be fine. With that though, if you're changing the neckline, remember to change your shoulder seam on the back here. Yep, so that's all marked out, and now it's just time to cut this out and move on to gores and sleeves. Alright, so we are all cut out. Gently fold up your pieces. It just helps keep things tidy as we go along. Thing I really do, a couple of things I really do like about this layout that works really well for me, and again, I'm about 5'9", size 10-ish, so the 45-inch wide works well for this pattern layout. It may not work well for everyone, is that in between the front and the back, you end up having this strip that's kind of like built-in bias tape, which works really handy for like using bias on either your sleeves or along your neckline. So built-in bias in this cutout plan, which is really handy. And then for our back piece here, we kind of have a built-in gore over here for this one. And you can either use this, typically what I'll do is then this gets flipped around and this turns into our back gore. Or sometimes I call it a butt gore. Anyway, and then that's the back of the dress with the gore already cut out and ready to go. We'll have to trim off the end, but you know, that comes later. And then set that aside. And then we have our back here with that nice built-in train, although we may be cutting that off later on. We don't know. Alright, so there is the body cut out. We still need to cut out the side gores, the sleeves, and then since I have the fabric and this fabric itself is light enough, I'm going to go ahead and do a fully lined bodice for this one. Alright, and now it's time to finish cutting out the rest of the pieces. So I folded it in half, with this being the selvage edge to selvage edge. There's a fold over here, and then there's the raw edge, or the 45 length going this way. Because from my gores tend to be about 44, 45 inches, for me and my body it makes a lot of sense to run my gores along the width of the fabric when I'm dealing with 45-inch fabric. So how I mark that out is I'm looking to make triangles with this, and so I'm going to start in a corner and come down, we'll say 46. Huh, yeah. How wide is this fabric? Ah, alright, so this fabric's more like 52 inches wide. That's weird. Anyway, so 46 inches or 45 if that's what I had. And then you can kind of make this a straight line. It doesn't matter. You're going to be sewing this together anyway. There's a lot of people that believe in sewing a bias to grain fabric to prevent the warp that can happen, kind of the droopiness of having a bias to bias edge. I don't find that that makes too much of a difference for this kind of lightweight material for this dress cut, and then also because I have that messy pooled hem that I'm going for. If it does warp an inch or two, it doesn't really matter that much. So 46 inches. I also find that gores more than 36 inches wide tend to kind of bulk and pull weird. So I tend to only go 35 or 36 inches, 3 feet wide on my gores, and so that measurement puts me to 18 inches here. So I make a little tick mark there. And then from the tip of the gore down to, you could be exact and go to 46 here to have that really strong curve, or it doesn't really matter. I'm gonna go to 48 just to make sure. And then boop, 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 draw your diagonal, that bias cut, and then down here you can either measure off your 18 inches again for that 36-inch wide, or you can also just eyeball it from here down, kind of trying to make a straight line. And then just go for it. Awesome. So those are going to be our two side gores. And of course, if you wanted to, you could put in the curve of that gore like that. So the next off is a slot, our sleeve and our bodice pieces. And again, this apparently 52 inches wide fabric is working out really well. For my pattern, I can double stack my torsos. So these are going to be the lining for the torso. The lining is nice when you're dealing with lighter weight fabrics like this. You can use the same fabric to line it, which helps with the washing and any potential shrinking that may occur, because they're going to shrink at the same rate. Or you can use something different. So like if you have a really lightweight linen, you can line it in a heavier weight linen or something like that. What happens is that just kind of helps smooth the silhouette out, and it also helps kind of distribute the force. There's a lot of physics going on in the torso of a 4-piece Code Hardy, and so having more fabric to distribute that force through is oftentimes handy. So I'm going to line up my pieces this way, just so that I have enough, and since I'm working with seam allowance included, I can go up to the edge there. And then for me, and then the sleeve just kind of comes in some of this leftover material. Because I have the fold here on this edge here, I want to try to move everything over, so then to leave the largest remnant as possible. And so this is my sleeve pattern with the sleeve cap and the edge, and then I have kind of the shortest sleeve for the cap style sleeve, the short sleeve. I'm going to go a few inches longer on this one, just because I have the fabric and I think it might be cool to try out. And with this, though, we only need 2 of these, and so here we go. That's 2. Although I don't know, that's not going to matter how much fabric I save one way or another where I put it. And so with that, then I have this nice big piece of fabric that I can utilize for something else. So let's mark this out and cut it out. And I think we are done here on the cutting room floor. So as you may have noticed, I don't use any pins. I don't use weights when I'm doing all of this. I love having muslin patterns because they stick to the fabric really well. Also, the fabric that we're using, this pseudo linen, it's not slimy, it's not shifty, it stays in place, and so there's a whole lot less to do with that. One trick I like when I'm cutting is because when you're moving your scissors, they can shift the fabric while you're cutting. So I put tension at the end of my cut as I'm cutting. And so I'm kind of slightly lifting the fabric off the floor, but I'm holding a little bit of tension onto it, so it's keeping the fabric together. And Code Hardies, especially the big skirts, are so that, plus or minus a half inch, it doesn't really matter at all. And just make sure that you're getting through both. I'm just going to cut it there, the bottom and the top layers of that. So once again, for here, I'm going to start my cut, making sure I'm going through both layers. Then I hold a little bit of tension, and then with nice sharp scissors, you can just cut, slightly lifting it off the floor so you're not cutting on or through the carpet. And just continue on that way, and it works out really well. There's one little hiccup. I forgot that I had extended my neckline, and so this turned out to be really tight here, quarters. I think it's gonna clear it. It'll be close enough, right? So a lot of this stuff too can get readjusted during the sewing process. So if in doubt, overcut by a little bit, it's always easier to cut an inch too big and then remove that when you start the sewing process. So when I'm sewing clothes for other people, it's always the time where I take the time to do the extra next steps. And making this video recording, it reminds me that let's just take the time to do the extra step. And what I was talking about before with the gores, that I often ignore the idea of sewing the biases together, because a bias, right, so you have your grain line which runs with either the warp or the weft thread, and then your bias cuts across that at a 45 degree, and then that means that it's going to be super stretchy, which is handy when you're utilizing it for like bias tape to hem non-straight lines. But for gores, sometimes these can stretch and cause warping to the hem line. So while I'm here and things are laid out quite nicely, I'm just going to take this top gore here. I'm going to take the grain line, I'm going to flip it over, and poof, we now have bias to grain and grain to bias, which will decrease our potential warping of our gores. Yeah, this is also really handy to do because this fabric doesn't have a front or a back, and so flipping it over that way is a really simple solution to having a bias and a grain edge lined up. So I don't know if it'll make that much of a difference for the way that I sew. I have yet to find it really makes a big difference, but at least for these 4-panel coat hardies sewn up in this way. So we're all cut out with very little scrap fabric at the end of it all. I like to go ahead and put away my pattern pieces right now, just fold them up and put them away to the next project so that they are easy to find. And then I have things piled up and folded up quite nicely that are actually my pattern pieces. And then what I like to do, just real quick while I'm still here, is I go through my scraps and I just go ahead and pitch the stuff that is smaller than like what I could get a button made out of. So just in case I wanted to ever spend the time and make some cloth buttons. Like Susanna has some awesome YouTube videos on the Untitled YouTube channel about cloth buttons. So I just do a quick sort into, and then if like it's smaller than what you can make a button out of, I just cut that off, pitch the tiny part, keep the larger part. And then that way, that's kind of a preemptive strike at the accumulation of lots and lots of scraps. And so that's just going to go straight into the trash right away. This other stuff I'm going to fold up with this, and then that way I have it if I do ever want to come back again, make cloth buttons, if I need to patch it maybe, bag linings, I don't know, this could, a vest lining for Attila or something like that. And then also these little scraps are going to come in really handy when it's time to test our buttonholing aspects of it. And then also if we do ever want to make thick bias tape for our hem, then we have the fabric right here ready to go as well. I haven't decided how I'm going to hem this. I'm going to make it up, and then once I try it on and kind of twirl around with it a bit to see how the fabric flows, I'll then decide if I'm just going to roll hem it or if I'm going to actually put on a nice thick heavy hem of additional fabric. So yeah, we are all cut out. Let us move to the sewing room.